that supervisor will have your resume. And if you interview with the team will have your resume too. So basically, everyone has your resume. And while they're interviewing you, they're looking over your resume. And a lot of times they're going to ask you questions about things on your resume. Welcome to Debt Free in IT. I'm your host, Mike. This podcast is for anyone who's looking to get into the IT industry, whether it's for a career change or you're just interested. I think you come to the right place. Today's episode is from a listener's question. So this listener stated that they have a bachelor's degree in computer information systems. They reside in Canada, and currently they're applying for entry-level IT technician and help desk roles, and wanted to know how can they start preparing for interviews. So when it comes to preparing for an interview, one of the first things I like to do is start doing my research. So doing research is basically me going to the company's website, seeing if there's any recent news on this company, seeing what's going on with the company, also seeing what type of services they offer if it's a company I'm not really aware of, but getting an overall insight and an outlook on what this company does. Then also I'm checking to see, okay, the services they offer, is this company a managed service provider, or am I coming in providing in-house support? You know, is this a very small company, a couple hundred users, or is this a mid-sized company, or is this a very large publicly traded company? So all of them, each one of these positions is going to have a different meaning at each one of these jobs. So I'm checking for all that. And then at the same time, I'm formulating questions about this company or things I may want to ask during the interview. And then after they're doing that, sometimes you may be able to go to Glassdoor and see if you can find any reviews on this particular company. Sometimes with Glassdoor, they put it behind a paywall where you may have to leave a review in order to see a review. But I'm going to try to see if I can find any kind of other reviews or anything like that about the company. So Glassdoor is usually the best place for that. If it's a very large company, you may be able to just put it in Google and see what pops up. But overall, I'm just doing my due diligence on this company. That way, once I get in the interview, I will be well informed about what this company does. Anything I'm confused about, I'll be able to ask someone who's interviewing me to get some more insight and get some clarity. So after doing my research on the company, my next step is to go back and look over the job description that I applied for. So sometimes, you know, it may end up where you applied for multiple jobs and this job may have been one that you applied for months ago. So I'm going to go back, find the job description, just give it an overlook just to make sure that I'm capable or that I meet some of the requirements. You know, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to meet all of their requirements. You know, some jobs now, they put everything on the job description. And even though that the person they end up hiring may only be able to do 25% or 30% of what they have listed on that job description. But as always, you want to let this company know, or the people that's interviewing you, let them know that you're eager to learn. Yeah, I can't do everything, but I'm willing to learn how to do this if someone could show me. Give me a couple of months, or if this job is asking for a certain certification, let's say if you don't already have that certification, you may say that, okay, I'm studying towards this certification, where that job may be able to give you a year or 6 months to get that certification. So being open-minded and letting the job know that you're eager to learn. And then, like I said, just overlook the job description so that you know exactly what you're going and what you're being interviewed for. So one of the things I did back when I got my first IT role in healthcare, basically what happened was I had applied for the job. I think it was probably over 3 or 4 months before I got called. So when I got called and I'm walking in, they showing me around, I still didn't know what I was being interviewed for. So I didn't know what I was being interviewed for until I walked in the data center and I seen all the screens and everything. And I'm like, man, who be in here? And, you know, they looked at me and said, oh, this is where you'll be if you get hired. So I'm like, oh, okay. So just, it happens sometimes. So make sure you can go back, look at the job description, just so you know that what you're going and what you're being interviewed for. So the next thing I like to look at is the interview process. So as you're going into your first interview at this organization, some places may interview in 2 to 3 different stages. So usually your first interview, it may end up being with a recruiter. So basically, when you're talking to this recruiter, their main goal is to get a feel for your personality. So they're going to ask you general questions. They may not even get into no technical questions. Most of the time, they're asking general questions, seeing where you was born at, where you raised up, seeing how you overall get a good feel for your personality and what type of person you are. So the second phase of the interview process is usually you meeting with the team or you meeting with the manager of that team. So basically, this is where you'll get some of those technical questions at. So this is where they're going to ask questions that pertain to your job role. So you stated that you're going for a lot of IT technician roles and help desk roles. So this is where those general IT support questions and things like that, this is where you're going to get asked those questions. And then also you need to prepare for questions that's not technical, but questions like how would you handle certain things? So questions that may ask you, when was the last time you had to work with a team? Or questions that may ask you, when was the last time you showed patience from working with a user that may not be up to par or may not be computer savvy, because you're going into those customer support type roles. And then also, of course, customer service is always high here. So they may want to know, okay, what type of customer service experience you have. So then you can go back into your resume, any other jobs you may have had where you had to work directly dealing with the public or where you had to have some form of customer service. As trust me, customer service usually goes a long way when it comes to the IT technician position, and especially when it comes to those help desk positions. But at this part of the interview process, this is where you're usually going to get more of those technical questions. Quick pause. I'd like to introduce you to the Log Files. The Log Files is a weekly newsletter to help you start your IT career with practical advice and tips, powered by yours truly. I launched it in the beginning of the year. It's packed with actionable advice, resources, and insights to kickstart your IT journey. The link is in the description as well as pinned in the comments, so don't miss out. Now back to the episode. So my next tip is to make sure that you prepare for those common IT interview questions. So during the interview, you're going to get hit with some common questions. Then you're going to get hit with some general IT support questions. The common questions, they're going to come in the form of the most common ones that I always hear is basically, how would you handle an upset user, upset customer? What would you do if you got asked a question and you didn't know the answer to something, or you had an issue and you didn't know the answer to it? How would you go about finding that answer? And then also name a time where you went above and beyond to help a customer. So basically these common questions that you may get is basically to kind of see where your head's at, what type of person you are also. So a lot of this that goes into the interview process is a lot of seeing what type of person you are, how you answer certain questions, trying to get a feel of how you may react in certain situations. Even though just from coming up with these questions, it's not 100% guaranteed, but basically every interview I ever went to, basically I got asked a couple of those common questions. So make sure that you're ready. A lot of times, instead of sitting there having to think, a lot of times you think in advance where you may already have some moments or things at your previous job that can exude or that can help out with those common questions. But basically, we know that you're going to get common questions and then you're going to get technical questions. So that's one of the tips I always like to think about also, or brainstorm on, because I know 9 times out of 10, I'm going to get some type of question like that where I may have to go back and talk about a time from a previous job where I helped out a customer or something where I went above and beyond for a customer. And then my last tip after you prepare for those common questions is you want to also prepare for questions that relates to the job role. So you want to look at those IT support questions you may get, help desk questions you may get. I know it's hard to guess what questions you may get, but you want to try to prepare. You want to look over any material you got. You want to review some common concepts like some basic networking, some PC basics, look up common issues. Basically, also be able to walk someone through solving the issue. So, if you have a user that calls you and they're not able to log into their PC, how would you troubleshoot the issue what would you have that user to do? So think from that aspect. Then the last, look over your resume, because one thing we know for certain is that recruiter will have your resume, that supervisor will have your resume, and if you interview with the team will have your resume too. So basically everyone has your resume, and while they're interviewing you, they're looking over your resume, and a lot of times they're going to ask you questions about things on your resume. So if you never dealt with Active Directory, don't have Active Directory on your resume. Make sure that everything on your resume, you can speak to it. You know, you may have something on there that you can't go thorough with, but you may have something that you worked with, but you may not been the person that supported it. So bringing up an example like Active Directory. So you may have worked with Active Directory, you know, resetting passwords or creating users in Active Directory, imaging PCs and Active Directory, moving them to the correct OU in Active Directory. So if you got something like that, you know, it's okay to put that on there, but make sure you can speak to it. You know, don't have something on there and you get asked a question about it and you draw a blank. So it looks kind of bad. It looks like you might have been just hyping up your resume. So make sure you can speak to anything on your resume. And then my last tip, this is for if you're interviewing in person. So if you're interviewing in person, you want to make sure you come presentable. Make sure you're dressed up. You know, make sure if it's casual, make sure you got on a collared shirt at least. I know most people come to interviews in a suit jacket and a tie, but make sure you have a collared shirt on at least. You know, you don't want to go there in street clothes, you know, t-shirt, shorts, things like that. You want to look presentable, because usually your first impression goes a long way. So your first impression is usually what people going to think about you. So make sure you come looking presentable and just making sure you look the part, because like I said, that first impression goes a long way. And then another thing to remember is that a lot of people start out bad at interviews. I was horrible at interviews. But what happens is the more interviews you go on, you start to get more comfortable in those interviews, because you start to pick out patterns. If you're going for the same type of positions, 9 times out of 10, most companies going to ask the same type of questions in general. So they're going to ask the same type of questions. Only thing that may change up is sometimes the different systems you're working with. So they may ask you a question about a different piece of software or something like that. But overall, if you're going for a help desk position, you know, it's only so many questions out there that they can ask you that pertains to help desk. So if you're going for IT support positions or IT technician, you know, you're going to start to see some of the same questions as you're going on different interviews. So with that, you start to formulate better answers, you know, because sometimes I have seen some people where they may know all the technical stuff, but once you get in an interview and you're interviewing with a team of 10 people, it gets overwhelming where each person is throwing questions at you and you're nervous already. So sometimes, you know, it can become overwhelming where you may fumble on the interview and not do as well as you want. But one thing to note is that, like I stated earlier, usually during this interview process, you always get better. So the more interviews you do, the easier it gets. So with that being said, like I said, I wish you the best in your interview process. Keep me posted. Leave me a comment, send me an email on how everything goes. So that brings me to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found some value in this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook, you can follow me at DebtFreeInIT. If you have any questions, you can email me at debtfreeinit@gmail.com, or you can visit me at debtfreeinitwithmike.com. Other than that, I'll see you next week. Peace.